My name is Jordan Sparks, External Vice President of the Game Makers Union, and welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. The Game Makers Union is, as many of you know, and perhaps some of you don't, is the game developing club at Ryerson. We are dedicated to making games, teaching people how to make games, as well as supporting them to make their own games. And that's what we wanted to do for all of our events. Checkpoint came about last year when we wanted to sort of make a big event that sort of connected students with the game development community at large. Because we realized when we were doing the club last few years ago that there was actually a huge game development community in Toronto that we were previously unaware about, and it was amazing. It's fantastic. It's unique. It's really passionate, and we wanted to not only be a part of that, but we wanted to sort of feature it and make it and give a connection to that community with our members. We also want to connect to the professional community, and that's how Checkpoint was born last year when we did it for the first time. This year we have 3 great guest speakers. So we have Ryan Henson Creighton.
Yeah! Woo! Give it up for Ryan!
And we have Cecily Carver.
Yay!
These are our wonderful guest speakers this year, and I hope that you all enjoy them. I'm going to stop talking right now because of course, you didn't come here to see me. You came to see these wonderful guest speakers. So I'd like to introduce Cecily Carver as our first guest speaker of the night. Have at him. Oh, one more thing. We will be doing we'll be pulling raffle tickets after every speech. So for the first 3 speeches, it's going to be it's going to be the family discount card as the prizes, and then at the end of the night, we'll be raffling off a Nintendo 3DS XL and Legend of Zelda Between Worlds. So, floor is yours, Cecily.
I'm trying to figure out the optimal place to stand. The last talk I gave, I was standing right in front of the projector light without knowing that there were words projected on my face. So, okay, this looks good. There are no words on my face. Anyway, I'm Cecily Carver, and I co-run a group here in Toronto called Dames Making Games. And as you might guess from the name, we're a group that's primarily focused on building a community of game makers that is women-driven. It's not women only, but we're aiming to build a community that's about mutual support and skill building that is inclusive and welcoming. And there are a lot of things that we do. We have socials every month. They're free and they're open to everyone, and they feature usually between 3 and 5 presentations. We have game jams every couple of months. Do you all know what a game jam is? Yes? Okay, good. And we have workshops and a bunch of other things. So, Dames Making Games. I'm not going to talk too much about Dames Making Games tonight, but as part of Dames Making Games, I've watched a lot of people who are really excited about games attempt to make a game for the first time. And there are places where I notice that they're confused and they want guidance, and there are places where I notice that they trip up. So based on seeing lots of people work on games for the first time during Dames Making Games programs, I'm going to pass on that wisdom and experience to you. It's a talk that largely assumes that you are excited about games and you have ideas, and you've probably tooled around with some tools and some engines, but that you don't have a lot of experience taking a project from start to finish. If that's you, you can feel free to sit in the back and be like, I know all this already. Why is she telling me this? But I hope you'll find it a valuable refresher if that's the case. So this is often the experience of building something. And if you can't read it, it says, I fucking hate this, I hate everything. Wait, it's working now, I love all of you. If you've ever made a game before, you can probably identify quite a bit with this sentiment. And I want to say, you can make a game, even if you've never made one before, and even if you don't know how to code, and even if you can't draw. I put that last one in there because when I talk to people and say, you know, hey, making games is actually a lot more accessible than you might think. Usually the first thing they say to me is like, oh, I'm not very confident with coding. Being able to draw, I think, is as difficult, if not more difficult, than knowing how to code, but people almost never say this to me. So I like to put that out there to kind of say that there are a lot of different skills that go into making a game. It's not just about programming computers. And you probably bring a skill to the table, even if you don't know how to code. So when you get started, there are a lot of questions you should be asking yourself. What am I interested in is a big one. What kind of games do I like? What kind of games do I wish that I could play that aren't being made? And what technical resources are available to me? Often this will mean, do I have access to a computer? Is it a Mac or a PC? Will GameMaker install on my computer or not? Will Stencil install on my computer or not? Do I have friends who know how to do X and Y? And I would also ask, what are your existing skills? Again, it's not only about coding. Games also need writers, they need illustrators, musicians, designers, people who do 3D modeling, design. And also think about what you want to learn. I meet people who say they want to learn how to code, but I also meet people who are mostly interested in being artists, being animators and illustrators, or writers. And if you don't want to learn how to code, there are tools available for you that will still help you make a game. But it's also good to know whether this is something you're interested in or something that you're not interested in. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Sometimes I worry that my voice doesn't carry very well.
It's a little bit louder, so we have to.
Sure. Yeah. So coding not being the only skill that matters is something I've already emphasized quite a bit. I also want to say that when it comes to a lot of the tools that I'm going to mention and that Ryan's going to mention later, a lot of them promote themselves as being no-code tools, meaning they have some kind of system for expressing logic that is almost coding but not quite. And sometimes people will struggle with these, and also if they want to learn how to code, they'll get really hung up on what language they should learn. But I would say it's actually most important to get to know logic flow concepts rather than coding, because even if a tool advertises itself as being no code, a lot of these concepts will come up in each of these tools under different names. So if you can see it and recognize, oh, this is their version of an if statement, or this is their version of a variable, then you'll be a lot farther along than a lot of other people. So if you're taking notes, you don't have to. These are some of the concepts that are most useful for you to learn if you're going to use a tool like GameMaker or GameSalad or whatever. So variables, if and else statements, Boolean logic, and loops. And if you understand those concepts, you'll be a lot further ahead of the game in any of these no-code tools. So here's some things you might want to try. This is from 2001, A Space Odyssey, depicting the moment when primates learned how to use tools. So we're moving past the phone. I like to group the various game-making tools into tools that are designed to make one specific kind of game, and tools that are designed to be more of a framework that allows you to make lots of different kind of games. So in the group of tools that do one thing, here are some that you might want to check out. Twine is really great if you're an absolute beginner. It lets you make interactive stories that are mostly text-based. And if you're comfortable with HTML and CSS, you can do some fancy things. And you can learn to use it in about 5 minutes. There's a reason it gets recommended a lot to beginners. There's RPG Maker for RPGs in the early 90s style. There's Adventure Game Studio, there's RenPy for visual novels, and there's Inform 7 for text adventures. For tools that are more open and flexible that do a bunch of things, you can check out any of these. GameSalad, GameMaker, Stencil, Construct2, and Unity. And I've basically put them in order of what I think is the learning curve for each of them. The one that's easiest to learn is probably GameSalad, and it's at the top. And the one that has the steepest learning curve is probably Unity. But generally, when you're trying to decide what tool to use to build your game, there's a trade-off. And it usually means fast and efficient versus flexible and powerful. If your game falls into the category of games covered by the tools that do one thing, they'll basically be already set up
So
to-
sorry.
Who invited that guy? So yeah, fast and easy versus flexible and powerful. The tools that give you lots of freedom to build lots of different kinds of things generally have a steeper learning curve. So that's something to keep in mind. This is a flow chart, which means, yeah, getting things done doesn't have to be this complicated. So whenever you're making a game, the fun part is different for everyone, but I find that for everyone there's the part that they're most looking forward to, the part that they get excited about, the thing that really keeps you motivated and driven. And often that's plotting out a story. It might be designing mechanics. It might be planning the overall arc of the game. If you're really into drawing and animating, it might be doing concept art. It might be writing the dialogue. There are lots of different things that might represent the fun part to you, and that's where you're going to be tempted to spend a lot of your time. Game making also comes with much less fun parts. Integration and testing, project management and organization. This is actually a big one. It's helpful to know where all your files are. Bug fixing and resolving technical difficulties. It's not fun. For programming logic, for some people that falls into the fun side, and for some people that falls into the not fun side. And if you're setting out to make a game, it's really important to recognize that you're going to be tempted to spend a lot of time in whatever is the fun part for you, but you'll never have an actual complete working game unless you commit to spending a lot of time in there doing the unfun stuff. And this is my graph of the process. When you're making pretty much any creative project, you start out and you're really excited, and you make a little bit of progress, and you get even more excited. You're like, yeah, it's coming together just the way I wanted. And then you hit the tedious slog, and then you hit horrible technical difficulties, and then you panic. Sometimes you think about scrapping everything and starting over, which is a terrible idea. Don't do it. I'm going to talk more about that later. And then at the end, you have a complete game. And the reason I put this up here is to recognize that this will happen to you. You're going to get to a part where it's just horrible. If you spend any time at all in entrepreneurship or startup circles, you'll hear people talking about the minimum viable product. And the gist of what it means is you have an idea of what your fully featured product might look like, with all the bells and whistles and all the features that you want. But what you really need to focus on is say, okay, what is the most stripped down, most bare bones version of this thing that we could build and still have it be viable in the market? And that's something you really need to ask yourself when you're making your game. Ask yourself, what is the simplest possible version of my game? If you stripped it down until you could not strip any more from it, and it was no longer a game, what would be left? And if you run out of time, or if your resources run out, ask yourself, what would you cut? It's really important to figure out what that simplest possible version is and make that first. Also, in terms of process, this seems like a really logical flow, and it's extremely tempting. You think, okay, I'm going to plan everything out and do all my design and make sure I know exactly what my game's going to look like. And then I'm going to make all my art assets and do all my writing and all my backgrounds and all my sprites and everything else. And then I'm going to start programming. I'm going to cram everything into my engine of choice and make it all work. And then there will be bugs, so I'll fix all the bugs and I'll play test it. And then at the end, I'll have a game. And if you do this, you probably won't have a game at the end. It's much better to move in a spiral instead of a straight line. Figure out your extremely simple version of your game, even if it's not a game, and build that first. So that means plan it, do your art, build it, and test it. as stripped down as you can possibly make it, maybe even only one feature. When I start making a game, I think, okay, the first thing I need to do is make my sprite move around on the screen, and I'm not going to do anything else before I get that far. And then come back around and add the complexity in circles. Work in a circle instead of a line. And one of the big problems with the idea of working in a straight line, or what is in software development circles is called a waterfall process, because the org chart looks like this, is that if you've made assumptions about your technology that turn out to be wrong, or if one of your mechanics is fundamentally broken or really confusing in ways that need major fixing, if you front load all of your planning, you're not going to find out about these problems until really late in the process, and it's going to be really demoralizing. So in order to avoid nasty surprises later on in the process, start somewhere comfortable, but put a limit on how long you stay there. Don't spend all your time on concept art. Get familiar with your technology as early in the process as possible. If you're using GameMaker, make sure you have some concept of how GameMaker works. Same for Unity, same for Twine, whatever. Placeholders are your friend. Don't think you have to get the art perfect before you start actually building something. And try to finish a complete cycle before diving really deeply into whatever your fun part happens to be. And this is probably the bulk of what I want to talk about today, is when I see people who come to Danes Making Games and they're really excited to make a game, they are prepared to spend lots of time on it, they're prepared to get through some of the difficult parts, but they hit these pitfalls. And sometimes it seems like no matter how many times I warn people about them, they still trip upon them, which is the nature of a pitfall, I guess. But if there's anything I want you to take away from this, it's these things. If you're making a game for the first time, it is not your magnum opus. This is Ludwig van Beethoven for any classical music fans in the group, but don't think of yourself as Ludwig van Beethoven. If you're making a game for the first time, it's probably not going to be the game of your dreams. Yeah. Maybe some of you can recognize yourself in these statements. I always get really nervous if someone comes to me and they're making a game for the first time and they say, I've been thinking about this idea for years. And you know, I never want to turn away anyone from something that they're really excited about, but it's important to accept as early as you can that the thing that you make, especially if you're a new game maker, is probably not going to look like the thing in your head. It's not going to be true to your vision in all kinds of ways. And some people, when they realize this, they don't want to work on it anymore. They say, if I can't build the thing that's in my head, then I'm not interested anymore. And that's always really sad to see. So if you have that wonderful idea that you're really excited about and that you've been thinking about for years, maybe make that your second or your third game. Give yourself room to make mistakes and take some of the pressure off. And don't be the person with an enormous folder of concept art but no demo. Also, the choke trap. I always try to come up with a way to describe this phenomenon, but what seems to happen is, again, someone is making a game for the first time, they're really excited, but then when it comes time to move beyond the planning process and actually start building the game, they choke. And I imagine that inside their heads, it looks a little bit like that. So, here's some signs that you might be choking. If you get really obsessed with trying to figure out exactly the perfect tool for what you want to make, rather than trying a bunch of them and experimenting, it's going to be a lot harder to complete something. If you think you need to figure out everything about your game before you actually start making it, you might be in the process of choking. If you don't want to talk about it or show it to anyone, there might be some details you want to keep secret for reasons of spoilers or whatever, but it's usually a good idea to get feedback on your process and talk to people and show them what you're working on through the whole stage, not just when it's perfect. And if you have a beautiful title screen but no demo, it's the wrong way around. Feature creep. This is a bad one because it hits you later on in the process, and usually once you're really deeply into something. Feature creep is a term that I think is probably used in a lot of fields to describe when you're working on something and it occurs to you, like, oh, maybe we should add in this feature, or maybe we should add in this mode, or maybe we should add 5 more weapons, or maybe we should do this and that. And in adding all these things to your game, you lose sight of your core idea, and the size of your project actually balloons way beyond what you're actually able to accomplish. So you might be suffering from feature creep. If your core gameplay isn't working, but you're already thinking about adding additional gameplay modes and moves and weapons and stuff like that. If you don't have a really clear idea of that simplest possible game, you're going to be especially vulnerable to feature creep. And if you're playtesting it or showing to someone and they say, oh, hey, you should totally add this thing that just occurred to me. Sometimes, yeah, it's a good idea to add that thing. But if it gets to a point where you feel overwhelmed and you think, oh, I have to change my whole thing now, or there's so many things to add that I don't understand what I should be working on, then feature creep might be a problem for you. Also, the I'll just start over trap. This is a really, really tempting one, and again, it tends to hit later in the process, and it tends to hit at that low point to the graph that I showed you when you're panicking. And the thought process goes something like this. You've hit a particularly difficult problem, and you think, you know what, if I just scrapped everything that I've been doing and start over, I've learned so much in the process of making this that I'll make it so much better, it'll be so much cleaner, and it'll take me way less time because I know what I'm doing now, and I won't have to deal with this enormous problem that I've just come across. That is a fantasy that does not come true. If you scrap everything and start over, it's not going to be way faster and easier to rebuild the whole thing. You're going to run into new problems that haven't even occurred to you yet. Please don't scrap everything and start over. It's way better to have something that is finished that you can come back to and revise over time than something that's 3/4 of the way done but that you threw away because you got discouraged. So, the number one thing I want to impress upon you is your first few games are going to be small and buggy and not really the games of your dreams. They're not going to be what you imagined when you first dreamed of becoming a game developer. They're not going to be the games you dreamed of making. And that is okay, and it is actually encouraged. It's a sign that you're moving forward. You are way more likely to make the game of your dreams if you make a bunch of terrible games first. And this is a screenshot from E.T. the game, which is sort of legendarily terrible. And there was a talk about it in Toronto recently that tried to make an argument for why it wasn't terrible. I don't know if it's actually terrible or not, but
Great game.
the screenshot's in there anyway.
Great
Yeah,
game.
great game.
It is, really
All right,
is.
you should listen to Ryan. There's a sort of narrative about it that it's terrible, but I don't know, maybe it's not terrible. Maybe this is a game of someone's dreams. But yeah, make a bunch of terrible games first. I was at a conference where one of the guys from Von Beer was giving a talk, and at one point he showed a spreadsheet of all the different game ideas that they had that they were thinking of making these quick and dirty prototypes of. And it was just a giant list of stuff like, robot bears in space, ? And if you make lots and lots of games, you're much more likely to bring your skills to the point where you can make that wonderful game where you've had that idea for years and years. So take the pressure off yourself, give yourself permission to make something that's not great, and build your confidence that way. Also, ask for help. Some people suffer in silence forever because they're too embarrassed to ask for help, or they're worried that no one will help them, or they're worried that asking for help will make them look stupid. There are so many people in the city who love to answer questions, who are eager to help. There are internet forums, there are other developers. There is no excuse to suffer in silence if you're stuck in a problem or if you need advice or feedback on something. Ask for help, and ask for help frequently. This is me, and this is my contact information. When Jim and Ryan and I were emailing before this event, we were saying that we should talk a bit about some of the amazing community that exists in Toronto. Dames Making Games I've already talked about, and I hope that at least some of you check out a social. We have them every month. But also, there's a co-working space in Toronto called Bento Miso that hosts tons and tons of game events. Every other Monday they have games with friends where people get together and play games, but also people who are working on games will often bring in prototypes or beta versions or various unfinished versions of their games that people can try out and they can get some good feedback that way. So Games with Friends is really fun. Every couple of, I guess twice a year, they do the Bit Bazaar Market, which is kind of like a craft fair except for independent games. So you'll see local developers selling their games, but also selling interesting physical objects related to their games. It's really fun. And there are all kinds of other events happening there, but there's also an enormous community in the city. Toronto really has an amazing scene, and if you're interested in making games, it would be a huge shame if you didn't get involved with it and take advantage of it. And these fine gentlemen will also be talking about it. So before I pass it on to them, does anyone have questions for me? Or Jordan, did you want to leave this until the end, or did you want to do Q&A now?
You have how much time left?
I don't know.
Sorry.
How long have I been talking?
7 o'clock.
Oh, it's right, 7 o'clock?
Okay.
Okay, then we'll do the Q&A after.
All right.
Well, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank you, Cecily. Now we will be doing our first raffle now, so I hope you guys bought a raffle ticket. Matthew. Matthew, prepare to pick one. Also, courtesy of our president, Ian Nastagis there, raise your hand. The president of GMU, Ian, we are going to also be handing out Steam games with our raffle, with the first 3 raffles.